Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you're watching the World Report on News X World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian ordered security forces not to crack down on economic protests, drawing a distinction between peaceful demonstrators and armed rioters. Trump says Venezuela will turn over 50 million barrels of oil. U.S. crude futures fell 1.3% to 56.39 per barrel after the announcement. White House says U.S. discusses range of options to acquire Greenland, including use of military. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung says he has urged Chinese leader Xi Jinping to help him curb Pyongyang's nuclear program and suggested a freeze in its development of weapons of mass destruction was feasible with the right conditions. Syria and Turkey are boosting trade ties as Federation of Syrian Chambers of Commerce head Ali met with Turkish Cilvecgozu border governor Eren Yilmaz in Damascus to discuss the role of land crossings in deepening commercial integration. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa said he is deeply concerned by U.S. military action in Venezuela, calling for the immediate release of President Nicolas Maduro and his wife and urging the UN Security Council to intervene. According to the Guinea Republic Prosecutor's Office, Guinea's former security chief known as Copland has died in custody after being convicted in absentia in 2024 of crimes against humanity for the 2009 stadium massacre. The massacre killed at least 156 people and 109 women were raped. Brigitte Bardot's coffin arrives at church in Saint-Tropez on Wednesday at the start of a ceremony for the French screen icon who passed away last month of cancer. Now for this hour, we start with the Middle East. The UN Rights Office has accused Israel of systematic discrimination against Palestinians in the occupied West Bank, describing conditions as resembling apartheid. UN Rights Chief Volker Turk has said Palestinians face restrictions on daily life, from water and schools to healthcare and land access, under discriminatory laws and policies. The report highlights escalating settler violence, often with the support of or acquiescence of Israeli security forces. More than 500,000 Israeli settlers live in the West Bank alongside 3 million Palestinians. Since October 2023, over 1,000 Palestinians have been killed, while Israeli casualties have totaled at least 44 people. The UN has warned that settlement expansion, unlawful killings, arbitrary detention, and severe movement restrictions constitute almost complete impunity. The report urges Israel to dismantle settlements and systematic discrimination and respect Palestinian self-determination. Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Saul Sadka. He's a political commentator, joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Mr. Sadka, for joining us once again. Good to see you. Now, looking at this, the UN Rights Office has accused Israel of systematic discrimination against Palestinians. What more can you tell us about why UN has, what proved or what led to UN accuse Israel of this?
The UN fundamentally is a body that has been hijacked by enemies of the West and freedom-loving nations into a weapon against those nations, first among them Israel, which is why a majority of all UN resolutions, a majority of all of them are against Israel. It's why, for example, the UN is carefully silent about the ongoing protests in Iran, where the Iranian regime are murdering protesters at will. And yet they put out reports like this, biased, irrelevant, bearing no relation to the situation on the ground. If you recall that over 2 years ago, Israel was struck by surprise by jihadis on its borders, and at that point it resolved that under no circumstances was it going to allow any kind of jihadi armies to amass on or within its borders again. And that is what is happening in the West Bank at the moment. The situation is the IDF will no longer allow armed jihadis to exist there freely. And they are providing a constant level of resistance against them and wearing them down.
Can you describe a Palestinian person's life in under Israel or living in Israel in West Bank?
The situation in the West Bank for the Arabs who have been there since 1967, since Israel took over that territory, having taken it from Jordanian occupation, is far better in almost all regards than any of the Arabs in the nations around. They are wealthier by miles on average than Arabs living in Egypt, Lebanon, or Syria, or anywhere within really 500 kilometers from anywhere in Israel's borders. They have greater freedom of religion, particularly if they are Christians. Approximately 5 to 10% of them are, although most of them have left due to the persecutions of the Palestinian Authority, which was granted some autonomy 30 years ago and used that autonomy to turn to terror. They have generally the ability to work in Israel, a first world society, and build up some financial basis for their families. And I can only hope that if the people who live there, those Arabs, are willing collectively to agree to live alongside Jews and not to continue to try and kill their Jewish neighbors, I can only hope that in the future, perhaps in 25 years, after a generation has passed since the incitement in the textbooks that most of the children are raised in is very hard to erase, perhaps in a generation they will be able to have far greater levels of autonomy, and if they want a state, that's entirely plausible. But right now, due to the ongoing circumstances and the general views of the population there, it's hard to imagine that happening. But in the meantime, on a material basis, on a purely material basis, they are far better off than Arabs in the neighboring countries, and even on a level of freedom, even though they do not have the right to vote in the Israeli Knesset, and they are under the control of the IDF in terms of certain elements of their life. Nevertheless, in practical freedom terms, they are far freer, for example, than even people in Jordan.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Sadka, for sharing that. Please stay with us as we come back to you. Now we stay in the region, focusing on Syria. According to reports, Syrian army begins shelling of Aleppo Kurdish areas. The Syrian military has launched attacks on the Kurdish majority neighborhoods of Sheikh Maqsoud and Ashrafiyeh in Aleppo after a deadline for civilians to evacuate has passed. Authorities had previously declared these areas closed military zones and set up 2 humanitarian corridors to allow safe passage for the civilians. According to reports, thousands of people fled before the deadline. Let's listen into some civilians fleeing Aleppo's Kurdish areas.
الوضع صار مأساوي، وضع مخيف. اضطرينا نطلع من الأشرفية لأنه الوضع صعب جدا. يعني حيوان ما تركناه ورانا. الحيوان ما تركناه ورانا. طبعا عندنا تخوفات كثير إنه ما نرجع. وهذا بنقول حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل، بس حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل.
نحاول نأمن هالأولاد، نأمن العائلة. يعني 14 سنة حرب بظن بكفي. هذا اللي فيني بقوله.
Between Syrian government forces and Kurdish fighters have intensified in recent days. The situation remains highly tense as both military operations and civilian safety concerns collide. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Mr. Sol Sadka. He's a political commentator, joins us live from Tel Aviv. Mr. Sadka, thank you for staying with us. Now, before I get into the discussion, can you tell us a little bit about this minority group who's living in Syria, the Kurdish people?
So the Kurdish people are by far the largest minority group, the largest stateless minority group in the Middle East. There are approximately 40 million Kurds spread around the border areas of Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Iran, and also somewhat in Armenia and even in Azerbaijan. They are mostly Muslims, and they live predominantly in mountainous areas, although pockets of them live, as you can see, in cities like Aleppo. And they have been under the pressure of various foreign empires for centuries at this point, and they certainly do deserve a state. And one can only hope that happens, because as you can see, when you're a small minority under a oppressive, either jihadi or imperialist majority, you are at great risk. What we're seeing happening in Aleppo is just the next episode in a string of persecutions that has been perpetrated by the Jordani regime since they came to power over a year ago at this point.
Unfortunately, we have a breaking news. Mr. Sadka, I would like to request you to stay with us. Now, breaking news, a U.S. official confirms that the U.S. is attempting to seize a Russian-flagged oil tanker linked to Venezuela after a 2-week pursuit across the Atlantic. Russian President Vladimir Putin has sent Navy escort as U.S. plans to seize banned Venezuelan oil tanker. The operation, involving U.S. Coast Guard and military forces, is being carried out near Iceland, with Russian military vessels, including a submarine, reportedly nearby. The tanker, originally called Bella 1, had earlier evaded U.S. efforts to board it. This move could escalate tensions between U.S. and Russia, marking the first such attempt in recent memory. Now, for this discussion, we welcome back Mr. Sol Sadka. He's a political commentator, joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Mr. Sadka, for staying with us. Now that we know that a U.S. official has confirmed that U.S. Was trying to attempt to seize a Russian-flagged oil tanker linked to Venezuela, how do you think this will be unfolding, and how will this escalate tensions further regarding Venezuela, U.S. and Russia now?
Well, it's very, very interesting to see this. It was unclear a few days ago when Maduro was captured and taken away, and Trump explained that that meant that the USA was going to be essentially controlling Venezuela, how he intended to do that without boots on the ground. Now it looks like the plan is taking shape. The plan is essentially to turn Venezuela into an economic vassal of the United States. The United States will control who and to where Venezuela's vast oil reserves, they have the largest oil reserves in the world, where that gets sold to. And the capture of this ship, which is part of what they call Russia's shadow fleet, that has been used to evade sanctions on behalf of themselves, on behalf of Iran and Venezuela, who are all sanctioned in terms of their oil supplies because of their military actions around the world. They have been taken, if they're taking control of the ship, which is apparently involved in the trade of Venezuelan oil to bypass sanctions and to support the Russian axis, then that means that we now understand what Trump is planning. There will be no more exports of Venezuelan oil except to people that the United States approve, and through that the United States will essentially cut off Venezuela's supply of hard currency, except to the extent that it approves it. It's really kind of old-fashioned vassalage, imperialism. It's very interesting, and the effect on geopolitics could be huge, because Venezuela's oil is critical to the global supply, and is critical in particular to the dealings of the Russian axis. The Russian axis is going to be in dire straits if the United States really maintains what is essentially a naval blockade of Venezuela. If that's the plan,
Yes.
Trump plan for Venezuela is taking shape.
Mr. Sadka, like you said, now Venezuela might be turned to a US's economic vessel. If that happens, how will this change the whole trajectory of oil trade in the whole world?
It's hard to say immediately, but what we can see is that it will certainly, if the Americans take control of Venezuelan oil with a view to pushing down the price and making the grey market for sanctioned oil more difficult for the people trying to engage in it, and therefore less worthwhile, because anyway the price is going to be higher because of all the various complications. That makes things very difficult for Russia because, like Venezuela, the only way it's able to fund its war in Ukraine, which in approximately a month will be going into its fifth year, a war for Russia that is longer than World War II, with 1 million men dead and their economy tanked and their sovereign wealth denuded to the point of almost being gone. The only way they're going to be able to continue this is by economic stability. And if the Russian oil economy is kaput, then Russia will also be kaput shortly afterwards.
With that, I would
So it could be that Trump's dealings in Venezuela recently are part of a much broader game, the goal of which is bringing an end to the war in Ukraine by stripping Russia of its ability to make money.
Thank you for highlighting that and staying with us throughout our news, Mr. Sol Sadka. Thank you very much. Now we move on to Asia. Bangladesh is actively exploring the possible acquisition of the JF-17 Thunder fighter jet, a combat aircraft jointly developed by Pakistan and China. The development follows high-level talks between the Air Force chiefs of Bangladesh and Pakistan in Islamabad. According to Pakistan's military media wing, the ISPR, Bangladesh Air Force Chief Air Chief Marshal Hassan Mahmood Khan, held detailed discussions with his Pakistani counterpart, Air Chief Marshal Zahir Ahmad Babar Sidhu, during a senior-level visit on January 5th. While official statements highlighted cooperation and goodwill, the most significant takeaway was discussion around a possible JF-17 procurement. The Bangladesh delegation was given a guard of honor and toured key operational and technological facilities. If finalized, the move could mark a major step in Bangladesh's Air Force modernization efforts. Now for this discussion, we welcome retired Major General Gigi Dwivedi. He's a defense analyst, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Major General, for joining us once again. Good to see you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, can you tell us a little bit about this JF-17 fighter jet and what strategic considerations could be driving Bangladesh's interest in this? And how could closer defense engagement between Pakistan and Bangladesh influence India and also the regional security dynamics?
Well, Asuma, once
Yes.
the Bangladesh and Pakistan relation were almost non-existent after Bangladesh independence, and I fought that war in 1971.
Wow.
And over last 50 years plus, there have been really no interaction between the two armed forces because Pakistan armed forces committed genocide and atrocities on Bangladesh. But after Muhammad Yunus government has come to power or has been in place, because Muhammad Yunus is an interim head of the government, there have been a warming up of relations between Bangladesh and Pakistan, and this should be seen in the background because there have been multiple visits by the delegation of both countries, including the Pakistan ISA chief and also naval chief Naveed. And interestingly, Bangladesh also hosted Pakistan naval ship Saif in Chittagong. So this new development is actually a matter of concern because not only relation between Pakistan and Bangladesh, but also China is very much in the game, and therefore this is a trilateral. Now you asked me specifically as to how JF-17 Thunder acquisition by Bangladesh would impact the security dynamics in this region. Well, first and foremost, JF-17 Block 3 fighter, which is the latest version, this aircraft has been developed by Pakistan and Bangladesh together. In fact, they have been cooperation between the two countries since last about 2 decades, and I was the defense attaché in China, so I could see this and confirm or at least give a spotlight myself. And as far as Pakistan is concerned, they said JF-17 has performed well during the recent Operation Sindoor, that is skirmish between India and Pakistan, which took place from May 7 to May 10. Well, Bangladesh is actually modernizing the armed forces, and it's a matter of concern for India. After all, Bangladesh is the only neighbor of India, and India poses no threat to Bangladesh. So this modernization itself is a big question mark as far as India is concerned. The second point is that the bonhomie now developing between the Bangladesh armed forces and Pakistan armed forces is again a matter of concern, because it opens another front for India, that is the front on the eastern side. And especially when you see India's northeast state is concerned, the China's animosity, especially in the Siliguri corridor, and Bangladesh, Pakistan, and China triangle, trilateral being coming into place or developing. Well, all these are definitely matter of concern for India's security, Asuma.
Thank you very much, Major General Gigi Dwivedi, for sharing that. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, moving on to Europe, members of the Coalition of the Willing, Ukraine and the United States have met in Paris, reaffirming their commitment to a just and lasting peace in Ukraine in line with United Nations principles. The group said Ukraine's ability to defend itself is central to Euro-Atlantic security and must be protected in any peace settlement. The coalition agreed to put in place politically and legally binding security guarantees to be activated once a ceasefire takes effect. These include a US-led ceasefire monitoring mechanism, continued long-term military support, a multinational force to help rebuild Ukraine's armed forces, and binding commitments in case of any future Russian attack. The group also announced a new US-Ukraine coalition coordination cell to be based in Paris. Now, for this discussion, we welcome back retired Major General Dr. Gigi Dwivedi. He's an international affairs expert, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Major General Doctor, for staying with us. Thank you. Now, looking at this, how credible are the proposed security guarantees without NATO membership?
Well, Suma, firstly, President Trump's peace plan, one of the sticking points was the security guarantee for Ukraine. And therefore, this conference or this meeting in Paris, wherein European nations and NATO allies, even US and Canada are part of it, was to hammer out some kind of framework wherein a security of Ukraine is guaranteed against the further aggression by Russia. And you asked what is the efficacy of this security guarantee. Firstly, this security guarantee will come into force once there is a ceasefire and once the hostilities stop and there is a peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia. Only then this peace agreement will come into force or it will be implemented. Now it has a certain question mark. Firstly, Ukraine is not the member of NATO, and NATO members have a Article 5 in which in case one member is attacked, then it will be considered as attack on all the members. So therefore, there is one big question mark. Secondly, how it is politically binding, the ceasefire monitoring mechanism led by America, then the support to the Ukrainian armed forces, and binding commitment in case this framework or this guarantee is violated, are all big question marks. And so far, it is only a framework, and it will come into play only once there is ceasefire or peace agreement. Let's see what the Russian reaction are. Russia has actually played down. In fact, they have said that they do not agree or they do not support this kind of framework, and Russia has said that there is no legitimacy. So therefore, Russia has outrightly rejected this security framework or guarantee, and there are no indications of any ceasefire or peace agreement taking place. So therefore, this is only an exercise which has number of imponderables, and the first imponderable is when this ceasefire will come into place or when there will be a peace agreement, only then this will come into place. So this is basically a framework or a groundwork that has been done to provide guarantee to Ukraine in case the other two conditions are fulfilled. Asuma.
Right. Thank you for highlighting that. And what risks does a multinational force pose for escalation with Russia?
Absolutely. Once let's say that the peace agreement have been signed and security guarantee is put in place, and there's a ceasefire monitoring mechanism. Suma, ceasefires are always very vulnerable. They are always very sensitive because it is how the ceasefire sanctity is assured, and that can be assured only when there is a proper ceasefire monitoring mechanism and there are forces on the ground and they are able to carry out effective surveillance. So when, let's say hypothetically, that ceasefire infringement takes place from the Russian side, so then what will be the action of these forces which are actually monitoring the ceasefire? Will they come into direct contact, or will there be actually mechanism where there is no direct contact? So all these things need to be worked out, because if the ceasefire mechanism or the forces which are enforcing ceasefire come into direct contact with the Russian forces, obviously there will be escalation. So they'll have to work out a lot of the ground rules, and maybe they'll have to create some buffer zones so that there's no eyeball to eyeball contact between the ceasefire enforcing forces or mechanism and the forces on the two sides. So they'll have to work out, and this can be only assured when there's a reasonable buffer zone which will obviate any direct contact between the ceasefire forces that are monitoring it and the forces on the other side, whether it is Ukrainian or Russian, more so on the Russian side. Asuma.
With that, I would like to thank Major General Dr. Gigi Dwivedi for joining us today and sharing that insight throughout our news. Thank you very much. Now we move the focus on to Europe. The United Kingdom and France have said that they are prepared to deploy troops to Ukraine if a peace deal with Russia is agreed. Under the proposal, the UK and France would help establish military hubs across Ukraine, whose main job will be to deter any future Russian aggression. Allied leaders broadly agreed on the need for strong security guarantees for Kyiv, with discussions also pointing to a potential US role in overseeing any ceasefire arrangement. Meanwhile, Russia has repeatedly warned that any foreign troops deployed in Ukraine would be considered legitimate military targets, though Moscow has yet to officially respond to the latest announcements. Now, the announcement has sparked mixed reactions in the United Kingdom. Let's listen into what the people in London are saying.
I think generally we need to support Ukraine in whichever way we can, just to make sure that if indeed there will be a peace deal, we are able to keep that eastern flank of NATO fully supported and secure. So definitely I think whichever help Europe generally and the UK as well can give Ukraine in that respect is very important.
I think we should be doing it. I think it's the right thing to do. It's a moral thing to do. We should be standing up for our allies in the same way that I would hope that they would do the same for us if we were ever in the same boat.
I don't think anybody should be sending, if there's a peace deal, it should work. Shouldn't need someone standing in the middle trying to enforce it. Yeah? Shouldn't be the policeman for the world.
I think it's an overcommitment from our side. I think there's a lot more that they could do as a NATO, as a group, rather than commit to our forces. I was also actually in the Navy myself a long time ago, and we don't have enough armed forces personnel to make that commitment.
Now we move on to our next news. Shares of Michael Saylor's strategy, formerly MicroStrategy, rose in pre-market trading after MSCI dropped a plan that could have excluded the company from its major indexes. The index provider had previously considered removing so-called digital asset treasury companies, or DATCOs, from its benchmarks, arguing that they resemble investment funds, but the decision to hold off has eased near-term worries for investors, sending strategy shares higher. DATCOs have surged in popularity as companies began holding Bitcoin and other crypto tokens as core treasury assets. Analysts say the move removes a major technical risk. MSCI is expected to open a broader review later this year. Strategy shares were last up more than 4% before the bell, though gains eased as Bitcoin prices slipped. That's all we have time for. Keep watching News6 World for more news updates from around the world.